Have you ever woken up after one night and felt that your life had quietly turned in another direction? No thunder sounded. No event was big enough for anyone else to notice. Yet inside you, something could no longer remain still. A strange dream, a sleepless night, a memory suddenly returning, or simply one very still moment in a dark room can make you see a truth you had tried to avoid during the day. Under the light of Jung, night is not only a time for rest, but also a quiet space where the unconscious begins to send its first signals upward. When the outer world closes, when the persona no longer has to maintain a normal appearance before anyone, the parts buried deep within you may return very softly, in the form of a heaviness in the heart, an image in a dream, an unsettled memory, or a silent realization that can no longer be denied. In this video, you will understand that sometimes a single night is enough for the soul to recognize what reason has been postponed for many years. Because perhaps the very darkness you once wanted to pass through as quickly as possible is the first door opening the journey back to your true self, where life begins to change from one very quiet moment, when the soul finally dares to say, it is time to live differently. Number 1. One night makes you hear yourself. There are nights that do not change life through a great event, yet they make a person unable to continue living in the old state. Outside, everything remains almost intact. The room is still the same, the phone still lies quietly on the table, tomorrow's tasks are still waiting. But inside you, something begins to stir. It is not loud. It does not force anything. It simply appears quietly, like a truth you have avoided for too long. And it is that truth that turns the night into a threshold, where you no longer hear only the noise of the world, but begin to hear yourself. During the day, we often live through our ability to adapt. We know what to say so things become smoother, when to stay silent so no one feels disappointed, and how to appear fine so no one asks too much. We work, answer messages, fulfill responsibilities, swallow a few emotions that are inconvenient to speak, then call it maturity. But when night falls, when there is no role left to maintain, what has been suppressed begins to find space to return. Night does not create pain. Night only makes the inner room quiet enough for us to hear where something inside has been hurting for a very long time. I know a friend named Olivia. From the outside, Olivia seemed like a very stable person. She worked hard, spoke gently, rarely complained, and always made others feel they could rely on her. In gatherings, she often smiled at the right moments, listened very carefully, and responded very tactfully, as if everything in her life had been neatly arranged. But once, Olivia told me she had gone through a very strange night. Nothing special happened that day. No argument, no loss, no message wounded her. She simply came home from work, put her bag on the chair, dimmed the lights in the room, and sat for a very long time without wanting to open her phone. At first, Olivia thought she was just tired. But the longer she sat still, the more she realized that the tiredness was not in her body. It came from the feeling that she had lived too long as someone who always had to be pleasant. She remembered the times she had agreed to things she did not want, the times she smiled while feeling hurt inside, the times she said, "It's okay," only so others would not feel uncomfortable. She knew very well what others needed from her, but no longer knew what she herself needed. And that night, in a very quiet room, she did not hear any grand answer. She only heard a very small truth, but it was enough to make her heart sink. She had forgotten herself for too long. Under the light of Carl Jung, such a moment is not simply a passing emotion. Jung saw the human being as a layered life, in which consciousness is only the surface we are used to recognizing each day. Beneath it is the unconscious, where unnamed emotions, needs pushed aside, fears not yet understood, and desires once buried continue to operate silently. When those things are not acknowledged, they do not disappear. They only find another way to appear, through exhaustion, through emptiness, through repeated choices, or through one very quiet night when a person finally no longer has enough noise to hide from themselves. Carl Jung once wrote, "The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate. Some people keep sacrificing because they have not yet heard their true needs. Some call exhaustion responsible because they have not dared to admit they are depleted." Under Jung's light, such moments are not only tiredness, but signs that the unconscious is bringing a forgotten truth back to the surface. The human soul can be understood as an old radio in a room full of static. During the day, the noise of work, expectations, the fear of disappointing others, the pressure to appear fine, and the demand to keep moving make us think we are still hearing our life clearly. But in truth, we are only hearing the loudest sounds from the outside. Nightfall is like the moment the room becomes quieter. Then, a smaller frequency begins to appear. It may be sadness, weariness, unease, or a very real desire you once felt ashamed of having. And even if that signal is not pleasant, it is still a sign that something deeper in you is trying to be recognized. According to Jung, what is pushed down into the unconscious never becomes completely silent. It can return through unease, through emptiness, through reactions even we do not understand, or through a very quiet night when all outside noise has faded away. Night does not create the wound. Night only makes the inner space still enough for what has been covered to begin appearing. And when that happens, we no longer live only by habit. We begin to realize that there is a deeper part within us that has been waiting to be heard for a very long time. What matters is that this voice does not come to destroy your life. It does not necessarily tell you to leave everything, change everything, or make a great decision in one night. It only reminds you to look back at the place where you have abandoned yourself for too long. It reminds you that some "I'm okay" statements have actually hurt you, that some "I can handle it" statements have only been ways of postponing the truth, that some silences which seemed to preserve peace have slowly taken you farther away from yourself. And when a person begins to realize this, they do not need to do anything grand yet. The simple fact that they no longer deny their true feelings is already a turning point. Therefore, a night that makes you hear yourself is not a night that gives you every answer, but a night that removes your ability to continue unconsciously. After that, you may still step into the next day with the same old work, the same old people, the same old roads. But inside, there is a different point of grounding. You know what you have heard. And once the true voice has been heard, it will not be easily buried again. Perhaps the deepest meaning of this part lies in the fact that life does not always change direction through a dramatic turn. Sometimes it begins in a very quiet moment, when you no longer see your emotions as a nuisance, no longer see your exhaustion as weakness, and no longer see the inner voice as something that must be silenced. A night like that does not turn you into another person. It only brings you closer to yourself, and from that return, every true change can begin. Number 2. A dream reveals what you have buried for too long, and after one night becomes quiet enough for you to begin hearing yourself, the dream becomes the next door through which the unconscious steps into conscious life. There are truths inside that cannot appear in clear words, because they have been buried too deeply beneath years of avoidance, endurance, or self-persuasion that everything has passed. So they return through images. An old house, a road with no way out, someone you have not seen for a long time, a closed door, a scene that seems meaningless but makes you wake up with a very strange feeling, as if something in your heart has just been touched. In Jung's view, a dream is not a random fragment of sleep, but a way for the unconscious to reveal itself through symbols and emotions. Carl Jung once wrote, "The dream is a spontaneous self-portrayal in symbolic form of the actual situation in the unconscious. That is why some dreams are very short but remain with us for a long time, like when someone dreams of standing in a station watching the train leave, or seeing a childhood room with the window closed. Such images do not need complicated explanations. They quietly point towards something buried deep that is still waiting to be seen." In literature, Raskolnikov's dream in Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky is a haunting example. Before the crime actually happens, he dreams that he has returned to childhood and witnesses an old horse being beaten to death in the middle of a crowd. That dream is not only a painful scene, but also exposes the deep part that Raskolnikov tries to bury beneath his cold reasoning. His horror at cruelty, his denied compassion, and a part of his conscience that is still alive, even though he wants to turn himself into someone beyond all moral limits. Through a Jungian lens, that dream does not argue with the character's reason. It simply places him before an image he cannot easily deny. This also happens in ordinary life, even if it is not as dramatic as in literature. Some people dream of running forever without reaching anywhere. Some dream that they want to call someone but cannot make a sound. Some dream of dropping something very precious and waking up with a sense of loss they cannot explain. For Jung, dream symbols should not be understood through a mechanical formula. The same image of a door, for one person, may be an opportunity they have not dared to step through, while for another, it may be a truth they have not dared to open. The same darkness for one person may feel frightening, while for another, it may feel protective. A dream must always be placed within the dreamer's own circumstances, emotions, and inner life. A dream can be understood as a letter sent from the deepest floor of the soul's house. During the day, you live in brighter rooms where there is work, identity, responsibility, reasons, and reasonable answers. But underneath there are still unopened drawers, dust-covered boxes, photographs turned face down, things you thought you had forgotten but in truth had only put away. A dream does not pull everything up at once. It only places before you one small image, one strange feeling, one figure, one road, as if to say that something in the depths is still waiting to be seen again. From a psychological perspective, dreams can also be understood as the mind's way of processing unfinished emotions. During the day, we often control ourselves through reason, responsibility, and sentences like, "It's okay, that is over," or "I should not think about it anymore." But emotions do not disappear simply because they are pushed aside. When consciousness relaxes in sleep, the mind may rearrange those experiences through images. That is why some dreams are not logical at all, yet their emotions are extremely precise. You may not understand why you dreamed of a long hallway, But when you wake up, you know how familiar that feeling of being trapped is in your life. The subtle thing is that dreams do not always say what we want to hear. They can confuse us, disturb us, or even frighten us. But in the Jungian spirit, a memorable dream usually does not come to punish the dreamer. It comes to compensate for the one-sidedness of consciousness. If, during the day, you are too rational, a dream may bring images filled with emotion. If you always appear strong, a dream may bring you face to face with a forgotten softness. If you are too obedient, a dream may show you a rebellious part that has been suppressed. It does not sabotage you. It tries to make the soul more whole by bringing the excluded part back into the inner dialogue. Therefore, a dream at night can change a life, not because it predicts the future in a simple way, but because it reveals the deep present of the soul. It shows you what you are carrying, but have not dared to name, what you are avoiding, but still silently living with every day. Once that image has appeared, you may not understand it completely right away, but something in you has been touched, and it is that touch that begins to shift the inner life. What you need to do is simply keep the dream long enough to listen to it. When you wake up, write down the most striking image, the strongest emotion, and the detail that keeps troubling you. Do not rush to interpret it, and do not immediately search for a ready-made answer. Look at the dream as a symbol gently beginning to speak to your present life, because sometimes the unconscious does not need you to understand everything right away. It only needs you not to turn away too quickly. And if you have ever had a dream that made you wake up with your heart still trembling, share that story in a way that feels safe for you. Not so someone else can decode it for you, but so you can acknowledge that inside you, there is still a deep layer silently trying to find its way into the light. Sometimes, telling a dream is also the way we begin listening to the part of the soul that has been forgotten for too long. Number 3. A crisis night makes the mask begin to break. The moment a dream reveals what had been buried is often not the end, but only the first signal that something within us wants to step out of the darkness. And sometimes, it does not return gently. It returns in a night of crisis, when what we once used to maintain stability before the world is no longer strong enough to hide the truth inside. That is the night a person no longer cries because of one specific thing, but cries because they have had to be someone else for too long. There are masks that are not created from dishonesty, but from the need to survive. We learn to be strong because we were once not allowed to be weak. We learn to be pleasant because we once feared being abandoned. We learn to be successful because we once believed that only when we had value would we be loved. We learn to stay silent because we once saw that our truth made others uncomfortable. According to Jung, the persona is the social mask that helps a person adapt to life. But tragedy begins when we live in that mask so long that we mistake it for our true self. Carl Jung once wrote, "The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, fittingly enough, a kind of mask." This statement shows that the persona is not simply false. It is how we enter the world, hold roles, create impressions, meet expectations, and protect the more vulnerable parts inside. But if that mask becomes a permanent residence, a person gradually loses contact with their true feelings. They may still be praised as stable, capable, kind, mature, but the more they are recognized for the outer image, the more alien they feel from the inner life. A viewer of the channel once left a comment sharing that for many years she had always been the most okay person in her family. When her parents were tense, she was the one who softened everything. When friends had problems, she was the one who listened. When work was overloaded, she still tried to finish because she did not want to be seen as weak. Everyone said she was resilient, but one night, after shutting down her computer near midnight, she sat in front of the black screen and burst into tears. What made her collapse was not an email, a criticism, or a major event. It was the terrifying feeling of realizing she no longer knew where her true self was, outside the role of the one who can always endure. She wrote that that night, for the first time, the sentence, "I'm okay," became unfamiliar. It was like a piece of clothing worn for too long, once helping her be loved, trusted, and seen as strong, but now so tight that it made it hard to breathe. She did not hate the people who needed her. She only realized that she had turned being needed into the only proof that she had value. And when there was no one in front of her to care for, no task to complete, no noise to hold on to, the mask of being okay began to crack, revealing a person exhausted from being forgotten by herself. This is what many people do not understand about a crisis. They think a crisis is a sign that we are becoming weak. But through a Jungian lens, crisis is sometimes the moment when the soul no longer accepts living inside an image that has become too narrow. The persona can help us move through social life, but it cannot replace the soul. If we know ourselves only as the capable one, the calm one, the sacrificing one, the always positive one, the one who never needs anyone, then every feeling that does not fit that image will be pushed downward. And the longer it is pushed down, the more strongly it returns in the nights when we no longer have enough strength to control it. The persona can be imagined as a beautiful coat of paint covering a wall that has begun to grow damp inside. At first, the paint makes everything look clean, bright, and orderly. Others look at it and think the house is still fine. We also want to believe that. But moisture does not disappear simply because it is painted over. It silently spreads, weakening the wall, until one night a crack appears. The problem is not the crack. The crack only shows what inside has been ignored for too long. The crisis is the same. It is not always the destroyer of our life. Often, it only reveals the truth that the old structure is no longer healthy enough to keep us living inside it. A crisis night that breaks the mask does not come, so we hate every role we once carried. Some roles once helped us survive, helped us be accepted, helped us move through difficult periods. The problem is not that we have a persona, but that we forget we are much larger than the persona. You may be a caregiver, but you were not born only to care. You may be strong, but you still have the right to be tired. You may be someone others expect things from, but you do not have to offer your entire inner life just to keep others at peace. So when a night of crisis arrives, what matters is not to immediately fix yourself in order to return to the old appearance of stability. What matters more is to listen to what is cracking. Perhaps it is the image you have tried to maintain. Perhaps it is the role you have carried too long. Perhaps it is a way of living that once helped you feel safe, but now is taking you farther away from yourself. In Jung's spirit, maturity is not wearing a more perfect mask, but learning not to let the old mask swallow the true self. The lesson here is that not every collapse is a failure. There are nights when you think you are falling apart, but in truth, Only the false part, the overstrained part, the part that has lived to satisfy too many outside gazes, can no longer continue. When the mask begins to break, what remains may be fragile, unfamiliar and unpracticed, but precisely from there, a deeper truth has the chance to breathe. And perhaps a person only begins to live more truthfully when they no longer use all their strength to protect the image the world is used to seeing, but become brave enough to return to the person quietly waiting behind that mask. Number 4. When the shadow rises and forces you to look back at your life, after the mask begins to crack, what will appear from behind it? Sometimes it is not a gentler, more peaceful or clearer person right away, but the parts we have pushed down for too long, the anger never spoken, the pain never seen, the envy once hidden, the desires to live truthfully, once called selfish. This is when the shadow rises, not to destroy us, but to force us to look back at the inner life that has been exiled for too long. In Jung's view, the shadow is not only something evil, it is everything we once rejected because it did not fit the image we wanted to keep of ourselves. A person who always wants to be kind may bury anger. A person who always wants to be strong may deny softness. A person who always wants to be noble may not dare to look at envy, ambition, or resentment. But what is denied does not disappear. It only retreats into darkness, then one day returns through unexpected reactions, sudden outbursts, confusing choices, or one very quiet night when you suddenly feel like a stranger to yourself. Carl Jung once wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. When we do not acknowledge anger, it may turn into coldness. When we do not acknowledge pain, it may turn into bitterness. When we do not dare to look at our desire, it may turn into envy toward others. And when we try to live as if we only have light, the abandoned darkness will find a way to pull us back so we can see a more complete truth about ourselves." In Greek mythology, the story of Perseus and Medusa can be seen as a deep image of how human beings face the darkness within. Medusa is something that turns anyone who looks directly at her into stone, like truths within us so frightening that we dare not face them directly. Perseus does not defeat Medusa through recklessness, but uses a polished shield like a mirror to look at her reflection. That is also how we should face the shadow, not rushing in to be swallowed by it, not turning away so it can continue growing in darkness, but looking at it through consciousness, through calm observation, through a distance safe enough to understand what it brings back. In life, each person's Medusa takes a different form. For one person, it is anger that has been suppressed because since childhood they were taught that anger was bad, rude, unacceptable. For another, it is envy because they have tried to appear happy for others' success for too long, while deep inside, they also long to live a larger life. Some people fear being called selfish, so they do not dare to rest, refuse, or choose themselves. But sometimes, what they call selfishness is only a healthy need for boundaries after too many years of living as if they themselves did not matter. From a scientific perspective, suppressed emotions do not truly disappear. The nervous system still remembers tension, and what has not been processed can return as a reaction stronger than the present situation requires. A small sentence can touch an old wound. An ordinary relationship can activate the need to withdraw. What is buried in the mind often continues living in the body, in the way we love, fear, avoid, and defend ourselves. The shadow can be understood as a locked room in the basement. At first, you lock it because you think that it will be safer. You do not want to see the mess inside, do not want to remember what once hurt you, do not want to admit the emotions that make you ashamed. But the longer the door stays closed, the darker and heavier that room becomes, and the easier it is to fear it. One night, when the noise from the basement becomes too clear, you can no longer pretend your house is completely peaceful. Opening the door may make you tremble, but it is also the moment air begins to enter the place that has been forgotten for too long. When the shadow rises, it often forces us to look back at life in an uncomfortable way. We begin to see that not all pain comes only from the outside. There were times we betrayed ourselves and then blamed life for being unfair. There were times we did not dare to speak the truth and then became angry because others did not understand us. There were times we chose silence in order to be loved, then quietly resented the fact that no one saw our sacrifice. To look into the shadow is to look at the place where we have been wounded and also unconsciously keep the wound alive. This is not pleasant, but it is one of the most honest steps of maturity. But facing the shadow does not mean releasing darkness without restraint. It is not allowing anger to harm others or letting envy turn into destruction. What Jung points toward is recognition and integration. There is a very great difference between saying there is anger in me and letting anger control your life. There is a very great difference between realizing I am envious and silently pulling others down. When the shadow is brought into consciousness, it no longer has to act secretly behind our back. It becomes a signal. Anger may point to a boundary that has been crossed. Envy may point to a forgotten desire. Bitterness may point to a place where we have given too much without daring to admit that we also need to receive. So when the shadow rises, you do not need to hate yourself for having emotions that are not beautiful. You also do not need to decorate them into something noble. What you need is to look at them long enough to understand what they are protecting, which wound they are pointing toward, and what life force they are calling back after you have forgotten it. Because sometimes, what makes us mature is not proving that we are always bright, always good, always right, but becoming brave enough to look at the unfinished parts within us without letting them control us. Thank you for accompanying this journey to its midpoint. If this part touches you, leave the phrase, "Face the shadow," in the comments, as a small pause to acknowledge that every human being has a dark region that needs to be illuminated by consciousness, not by judgment, because only when we dare to look at the shadow do we begin to reclaim the life force once buried within our own darkness. Number 5. From the moment of awakening, you can no longer live as before. Right here, after the shadow rises and forces you to look back at the parts you once rejected, something very deep begins to happen. You can no longer return to the old life with the same level of unconsciousness as before. Before that, you could endure without naming your endurance, stay silent, and think it was peace. Live inside a pattern for a long time and believe it was your fate. But once a fragment of truth has been seen, even for a brief moment, it remains within you like a small streak of light. From then on, everything once familiar suddenly no longer feels entirely harmless. In Jung's view, awakening is not a floating state, nor is it a moment when a person becomes higher than others. It is the moment consciousness begins to see what once controlled it from beneath. When you realize why you have always feared being abandoned, you can no longer easily call clinging love. When you realize why you have always tried to please others, you can no longer easily call self-abandonment kindness. When you see that a part of your life has been built on fear, you can no longer continue calling it stability. True awakening does not make life lighter right away. It only makes pretending heavier. Carl Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." That sentence fits this moment deeply. Consciousness does not always come like gentle light. Often it comes as a very awake kind of pain. You hurt because you realize you have lived too long in a role. You hurt because you see that old choices once helped you feel safe, but also made you smaller. You hurt because you know that if you continue as before, you will betray a very real part of yourself. Yet, that pain also marks the beginning of a more truthful life. Think of someone who has lived for years in a job that everyone outside considers fine. The salary is not too bad, the environment is not too toxic, and everything looks reasonable at first glance. Every morning, that person wakes up, dresses neatly, walks the same road, enters the same office, and does work they know by heart. Nothing collapses. There is no clear reason to leave. But after one long night, when something inside has awakened, that person suddenly realizes that the emptiness they called stability has been silently eating away at the soul. The next day, the desk is still the same, the screen still lights up, co-workers still greet them normally, but within them, there is now a new distance from the old life. What changes is not the situation immediately, but the way of seeing. Before, they could tell themselves that everyone has to endure this, that personal dreams are a luxury, that depletion is just part of growing up. But after the moment of awakening, those self-consoling words no longer convince them. They begin to hear more clearly what the body says when entering the workplace, the tightening in the heart each time they must say yes to something they no longer believe in, the long silence in the evenings after returning home. They may not have quit yet, may not have changed yet, may not know which path is right. But from within, a truth has stood up. I cannot live forever as someone who is merely existing. The moment of awakening can be understood as when you are walking on a familiar road, then suddenly realize that the map in your hand no longer matches the land before you. Before that, you still followed old symbols, old turns, old directions that once helped you feel safe. But when consciousness lights up, you begin to see that some roads have closed, some destinations no longer belong to you. Some directions once called stable are actually leading you away from real life. Awakening does not create the feeling of being lost. It only makes you realize that you have walked for too long, using a map that no longer tells the truth to your soul. Therefore, after a moment of awakening, the hardest thing is not to change immediately, but to live with the truth that has just been seen. You begin to realize that some relationships can only exist when you make yourself smaller. Some goals are not truly yours, but things you learn to desire in order to be recognized. Some habits that once helped you survive, but now prevent you from growing. Some fears once protected you from pain, but also locked you away from life. This is when a person stands between two forces. On one side, the familiar old life, and on the other, a new call that is not yet clear in form, but is more truthful. In the Jungian spirit, this is where the journey of individuation begins to become real. Individuation is not becoming a perfect version of yourself, nor is it separating from everyone to prove that you are special. It is the process of becoming yourself more completely, by no longer living entirely according to outside expectations, no longer allowing fear to lead, and beginning to unite the parts that have been split within the soul. After the moment of awakening, you may still be afraid, still hesitant, and still return to old habits many times. But one thing is different. You know another path exists, and that knowledge cannot be erased. A person who has awakened does not necessarily become strong in a rigid way. Sometimes, they simply become more honest in very small things. They stop saying it's okay when inside they are truly not okay. They stop accepting more burdens only to be seen as good. They stop chasing things that once earned them praise, but no longer make them feel alive. They begin to choose more slowly, listen more deeply, and see more clearly. And even if those changes seem small, they are signs that the inner life is no longer completely under the control of old patterns. Perhaps the most important thing is that from the moment of awakening, you can no longer live as before, not because the old life immediately disappears, but because you no longer fully belong to it. A part of you has seen the truth, has understood that peace cannot be built on self-betrayal. From then on, each small choice begins to carry a different meaning. You no longer ask only what is safe, what is accepted, what will please others. You begin to feel what is still true for you. And when a person begins to live from that truth, life may not change direction in one night, but inside them, the old direction is no longer a place to return to. As we close this journey, perhaps we understand that one night can change a life, not because it brings an outside miracle, but because it reveals an inner truth that has been hidden for too long. In silence, through a dream, a crisis, or the moment the shadow rises, a person begins to recognize what they tried to avoid during the day. In the spirit of Jung, this is not a collapse, but the moment consciousness begins to touch the unconscious part that has silently guided us for many years. From that moment, the old life may still remain, but you no longer look at it with the old eyes. You begin to understand that peace cannot be built on self-betrayal, and maturity is not continuing to endure in silence, but daring to live closer to what is true within you. One night may not change your life immediately, but it can open the first turning point, where you no longer want to live only to adapt, please, or maintain an image that has made your soul weary. If this video touches something very deep within you, stay with that feeling a little longer, because perhaps the very moment you are listening is also a small door opening inside. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and walk with us in the journeys to come, where each story is not only for understanding Carl Jung, but for understanding your own soul more clearly. Because sometimes, life does not need many years to begin changing. It only needs one night, honest enough for you to no longer want to live far from yourself.